The wind in Texas in the year 1879 carried more than dust. It carried judgment. It carried whispers. And in the small town of Red Willow, those whispers followed one girl wherever she walked. She stood at the edge of the street that morning, like someone who had learned long ago that the world preferred distance. Her dress hung in torn layers, stiff with the dust of many roads. The faded fabric brushed against boots that were split open at the seams. Even the wind seemed to avoid her, at pushing strands of dirty hair across her face as if trying to hide her from sight. Once that hair had been the color of summer wheat. Now it hung in tangled strands, thick with dust and grease, clinging to her temples and neck. People passing on the boardwalk slowed their steps only long enough to wrinkle their noses. A woman leaving the bakery pulled her child closer. A man carrying feed sacks muttered under his breath. Someone whispered that the girl smelled like the stockyards outside town. Someone else said she must have been sleeping beneath wagons or stealing scraps from kitchens. But none of them noticed the way she stood. Her back stayed straight, even though hunger hollowed her cheeks. Her chin stayed lifted, even when cruel laughter followed her down the street. It was not pride. It was survival. She held herself the way a wounded animal might stand in open ground, daring the world to strike first. That was how the tall cowboy saw her. His horse stepped slowly through the dust as he rode into Red Willow that morning. The town looked the same as every other small Texas settlement scattered across the prairie. Wooden storefronts lined the street. A water trough sat near the hitching posts. The smell of leather, tobacco, and horse sweat drifted through the warm air. He swung down from the saddle near the general store. His boots hit the ground with a dull thud. At the brim of his hat cast a shadow over a narrow scar along his jaw. Most men who entered town noticed the saloon first. He noticed the girl. She stood near the edge of the road, half hidden beside a wagon wheel, trying to make herself smaller while pretending she was not hiding at all. A little boy pointed at her. The boy laughed. 2 other children joined him. The girl did not shout at them. She did not cry, but her hands trembled slightly as she folded them against her skirt. That small tremble was what caught the cowboy's attention. He stepped away from his horse and walked toward her. The movement was calm, unhurried, the way a ranch hand might approach a nervous horse that had been mistreated before. But the girl noticed immediately. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes flashed with warning. When he came within a few steps of her, she backed away quickly, as if expecting a shove or a joke. Her voice came out rough and sharp. "I'm filthy. Don't touch me." The words sounded practiced, like something she had said many times before, like armor. For a moment, the cowboy did nothing. He did not laugh like the others. He did not make a cruel remark. He simply stood there, studying her. That silence unsettled her. Men usually answered quickly when she said those words. Some mocked her. Others shoved coins toward her just to watch her scramble in the dirt. A few told her to move along before she ruined the view of their town. Silence was different. Silence meant he was seeing something, and that frightened her more than cruelty had ever had. She took another step back, but the cowboy finally spoke. His voice was quiet, calm. "Dust washes off." The girl frowned. He continued. "But being unkind is the only stain that sticks." The words confused her. No one in Red Willow had ever spoken to her that way before. She shook her head hard, sending more tangled hair across her face. "You don't understand," she said. I'm a stray. That's what they call me." She jerked her chin toward the street where 2 women stood whispering behind gloved hands. "Drifter, gutter girl, I heard them." Her voice grew quieter. "They're right." For a moment, the cowboy studied the ground between them. Then he reached slowly into the saddlebag hanging from his horse. The girl tensed immediately. She expected a rag thrown toward her, maybe a coin tossed into the dirt. Instead, he pulled out a simple metal canteen, and he held it out. She shook her head instantly. "I told you," she muttered. "I'm filthy." He did not step closer. He did not insist. Instead, he crouched down and placed the canteen on the ground halfway between them. Then he stood back up again. The gesture was small, but it was the first time in years anyone had offered her something without trying to control how she took it. She stared at the canteen as if it might vanish. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly and turned back toward the general store. The girl waited until he disappeared inside before she slowly stepped forward. Her hands shook again as she picked up the canteen. By sundown, the story had already spread through Red Willow. A ranch hand from Lone Star Ranch had taken an interest in the town stray. Men inside the saloon laughed about it. Someone placed a small wager that he would grow tired of the smell before sunrise. Others claimed he must be drunk already. The girl heard every whisper. She had grown used to whispers. But the next morning, something strange happened. The cowboy came back. He walked down the street carrying something wrapped carefully in cloth. People watched from doorways and windows as he passed. Even the swinging saloon doors seemed quieter as he walked by. He found the girl behind the livery stable. She sat on an overturned crate, trying to pull her hair apart with her fingers. Each tug caught another knot, and each knot pulled tears to her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. When she saw him, her body stiffened again. But she expected laughter this time. Instead, he walked a few steps closer and knelt down a short distance away. He placed the wrapped cloth on the ground and slowly unfolded it. Inside lay a simple wooden hairbrush. Nothing fancy, just clean. He picked it up carefully and looked at her. "I thought this might help," he said. The girl stared at the brush as if it were something dangerous. "I'm filthy," she repeated quietly. "You'll regret touching me." But the cowboy did not move away, and he simply stepped forward slowly, the way he had approached her the day before. Patient, calm, like someone who understood fear. He reached out and gently lifted a small section of the outermost hair near her shoulder. The brush moved slowly through the tangled strands. The first knot resisted. Then the bristles pulled through. The girl gasped, not from pain, but from the gentleness of it. No one had touched her hair with kindness in years. The brush moved again. Another knot loosened. Dust drifted down to the ground like old memories being shaken loose. She sat very still, her hands clenched in her lap. And for the first time since she had wandered into Red Willow, the girl did not try to run away. He did not hurry the work. The cowboy brushed her hair slowly, one small section at a time, as though every tangled strand deserved patience. Dust drifted down onto the dry ground behind the livery stable, and the wind carried it away across the yard. The girl sat stiff at first. Her shoulders stayed tight, her chin slightly lowered, waiting for the moment when the kindness would end and the laughter would begin. But it never came. The brush moved carefully through another knot. The cowboy's hand never pulled hard. When the bristles caught, he worked the tangle loose gently before continuing. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence felt strange to her. Yet it was not the kind of silence that comes before cruelty. It was a calm silence, like the quiet that settles over the prairie before sunrise. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was small. "You don't have to do this." The cowboy kept brushing. "I know," he said simply. She looked down at her hands. "They'll laugh at you." He shrugged slightly. "They laugh at most things." The girl almost smiled, but the expression faded quickly. She had learned not to trust moments like that. After several minutes, the worst of the knots had loosened. The brush moved more easily now. Strands of pale golden hair began to fall smoother against her shoulders. The cowboy studied the result quietly. "You ever braid it?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not since my mother died." The words slipped out before she could stop them. The brush paused for a moment, but he did not ask questions right away. Instead, he continued slowly working through the remaining tangles. After a while, she spoke again. "We were traveling west," she said. Her voice sounded distant, like she was watching the memory from far away. "A wagon train, heading for New Mexico." The cowboy listened without interrupting. "My father said there was land out there, said we could start fresh." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "We didn't make it that far." The brush moved gently through another section of hair. "Fever came first," she said quietly. "My little brother got sick. And then my mother," she swallowed. "By the time we reached the next settlement, there was only me and my father left." The cowboy's hand slowed, but never stopped. "What happened to him?" he asked softly. She stared at the dirt beneath her boots. "A man offered him work moving cattle," she said. "He left me at a boarding house for 2 nights. Her voice grew tight. "He never came back." The wind shifted through the stable yard, but for a long moment the only sound was the brush moving through her hair. "I waited 3 days," she said. "Then the woman told me I had to leave if I couldn't pay." She shrugged. "I started walking." The cowboy finished brushing the last tangle and stepped back slightly. Her hair now hung loose around her shoulders, still dusty, but no longer matted. He studied her face for the first time without the curtain of tangled strands hiding it. Sharp cheekbones showed beneath the dirt. Her eyes were blue, not pale blue. The deep blue of a storm rolling across prairie grass. And near her temple, half hidden beneath a strand of hair, was a thin scar. He noticed it, but did not mention it. "You made it a long way alone," he said. She shrugged again. You learned fast." From the front of the stable came the sound of voices. Several townspeople had wandered over, pretending to check horses or adjust saddles while watching from a distance. They had expected a joke. They had expected the cowboy to give up and walk away. Instead, they saw something far more uncomfortable. Kindness, without laughter, without reward. The girl noticed the watching eyes immediately. Her shoulders tightened again, and she instinctively tried to pull her hair forward to hide her face. The cowboy stood up. "Wait here," he said. She frowned. "You coming back?" He looked slightly surprised by the question. "Of course." Then he walked toward his horse. The girl watched him go, unsure whether to believe him. Most people who promised to return never did. But less than half an hour later, he came back. This time he carried a small iron basin and a kettle of water. When he set them down beside an old crate and poured the warm water into the basin, steam rose gently in the cool air. The girl stared at it nervously. "You don't have to," she said again. The cowboy dipped a cloth into the basin and wrung it out slowly. Then he handed it to her. "I know," he said. This time she did not refuse. Her hands trembled as she dipped the cloth into the warm water. It had been a long time since she had washed properly, and most towns chased her away before she could even reach the well. She raised the cloth slowly to her cheek. The first swipe removed a streak of dark dirt. She paused. Then she wiped again. More dirt disappeared. The cowboy moved slightly, placing himself between her and the open street. His broad shoulders blocked much of the view from passing townspeople. He said nothing. He simply gave her space. Slowly, carefully, she began wiping away the layers of trail dust that had covered her for years. The water in the basin grew darker with every stroke. Beneath the dirt, her skin appeared pale and sun-kissed rather than stained. Small freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks. Her hands trembled less now. For the first time in years, she could see her own reflection faintly in the water. She looked up at him suddenly. Her eyes searched his face. "Is it disappointing?" she asked quietly, as the cowboy looked confused. "What?" She gestured to her face, seeing what was under the dirt. He studied her for a moment. Then he smiled, not at her beauty, at her relief. "No," he said, "it's about time." Something inside her loosened then. For years, she had believed the whispers, believed that dirt had become part of her skin, that the road had changed her into something lesser. But the man standing beside her did not look at her that way, and he looked at her like she had always been worth seeing. Unfortunately, not everyone in Red Willow agreed. Late that evening, 2 men stepped out of the saloon and wandered toward the stable yard. They had been drinking. Their boots dragged through the dust as they approached. "Well now," one of them muttered loudly, "looks like the stray's getting polished up." The girl stiffened immediately. Instinct pulled her backward toward the stable wall. The second man laughed. Town was doing just fine before beggars started expecting charity. The cowboy rose slowly to his feet. He did not reach for a gun. He did not raise his voice. But something in the way he stood made the laughter fade slightly. "No one's begging," he said calmly. The first man smirked. "Maybe not yet." His eyes moved toward the girl. Strays usually start asking for more once they get comfortable. The girl lowered her gaze again, but the cowboy stepped forward slightly. "No one in Texas owns dignity," he said quietly, "and anyone who tries to take it will answer to me." The 2 men stared at him. For a long moment, the entire yard fell silent. Even the horses shifted uneasily in their stalls. Then one of the men muttered under his breath and turned away. The other followed. There was no fight, no gun drawn, but the message had been clear. The girl slowly lifted her head again, for the first time since her family's wagon had broken down years ago. She stood in the open street without lowering her eyes. The next morning, the wind moved softly across the Texas prairie. For once, it did not feel like an enemy. The girl woke early near the small campfire behind the stable where the cowboy had allowed her to sleep. The sky was pale with the first light of dawn, and the town of Red Willow still rested in quiet. She sat up slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The braid he had helped her make the night before had stayed mostly in place. A few strands had slipped free during sleep, but her hair no longer hung in heavy tangled clumps. For a moment, she simply sat there. The old fear tried to return. Fear that when the town woke up, they would remind her who she was supposed to be. The filthy girl. The stray. The one people avoided. She stood slowly and walked toward the horse trough beside the stable. The water inside reflected the pale morning sky. She leaned closer and looked down. The face staring back surprised her. Her skin was clean now, lightly browned from years in the sun. Freckles dotted the bridge of her nose. Her hair, though still rough, looked almost golden again in the morning light. But the most surprising thing was her eyes. But they did not look defeated anymore. Still cautious, still careful, but no longer empty. She straightened slowly. The cowboy stepped out of the stable at that moment carrying a saddle. He noticed her staring into the water trough. "What do you see?" he asked. She hesitated. "Someone I don't recognize." He leaned against the wooden fence. "Looks like the same person I saw the first day." She shook her head. "No," she said quietly. That girl was dirt." The cowboy studied her for a moment. "No," he said again. "That girl was surviving." The words stayed with her long after he walked back inside the stable. Days began to pass in Red Willow. At first, the town still watched her carefully. Some people whispered when she walked by. Others simply stared. But the girl no longer stood alone at the edge of the road. The cowboy brought her to the ranch just outside town where he worked. It was not a grand place, but just a stretch of prairie land with a weathered barn, a small bunkhouse, and long fences that needed constant repair. But it was honest work. The first time he handed her a saddle blanket, she looked confused. "You want me to help?" she asked. He nodded. "Everyone pulls their weight out here." She hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. She learned quickly. Within a few days, she could saddle a horse without fumbling. She helped carry feed, mend broken fence wire, and sweep the barn floor before sunrise. Her hands, once trembling from hunger and fear, began to grow steady and strong. Sometimes she laughed. The sound surprised even her. At first it came out awkward, like a door that had not been opened in years. But slowly it became easier. The cowboy noticed. He never mentioned it, but he noticed. The townspeople noticed too. One afternoon, a wagon passed the ranch road, carrying several families from Red Willow. Yet the children pointed toward the pasture where she worked beside the cowboy repairing a fence. "Is that the stray girl?" one of them asked. The mother looked closer. She frowned slightly. "That doesn't look like a stray," she said quietly. By the end of the week, even the saloon men had stopped making jokes. Something about the girl had changed. It was not just clean hair or washed skin. It was the way she stood. Her back stayed straight, but not in defense anymore. But it looked like quiet confidence. Still, fear did not disappear easily. One afternoon, she walked alone to the water trough after finishing chores. The wind rolled softly across the pasture grass. She looked down into the reflection again. Her braid rested neatly over one shoulder now. Her cheeks carried a healthy warmth from working under the sun. For most people, the sight might have brought pride. For her, it brought fear. The cowboy noticed her standing there and walked over. You've been staring at that water a long time," he said. She did not look up. "I don't like what I see." He frowned slightly. "You looked fine to me." She shook her head. "That's the problem." He waited quietly. Finally, she whispered the words she had been holding inside. "When people see beauty, they think they own it." Her hands tightened along the edge of the trough. "They take it, or they break it." The cowboy set down the tools he had been carrying, and he turned to face her fully. "What I saw that first day wasn't beauty," he said. She looked up slowly. "What was it then?" "Courage." The word surprised her. "You were standing in the middle of that street while everyone judged you," he continued. "You still kept your chin up." She looked away again. "I was just used to it." "That doesn't make it easy," he said. The wind stirred the tall grass around them. "You used dirt as armor," he continued. It helped you stay safe." She nodded slowly. "But armor isn't the same thing as who you are." She remained silent for a long moment. Then she spoke again. "Why did you help me?" The cowboy thought about the question. Finally, he shrugged. "Because someone should have done it sooner." She felt tears sting her eyes, but quickly blinked them away. For years, she had believed she was invisible, unless someone wanted to mock her. But this man had seen something else, something worth protecting. Weeks passed. The season slowly shifted toward late autumn. The prairie grasses turned golden beneath the cool Texas wind. One clear morning, the girl walked beside the cowboy into Red Willow. Not hiding, and not trailing behind. Walking beside him. Her boots were still worn from the long road she had traveled, but they had been cleaned and polished carefully. Her braid hung neatly down her back. People noticed. Some looked surprised. Others looked thoughtful. But no one laughed. As they walked down the street, a small girl carrying a basket of apples stumbled on the boardwalk. The basket tipped. Red apples rolled across the dusty ground. without thinking. Sure, the girl knelt quickly and began gathering them. The child stared at her wide-eyed. "Thank you," the little girl said. Their fingers touched briefly as the last apple was handed back. Sticky juice covered the child's hand. The girl simply smiled. For a moment, the entire street seemed quiet. The townspeople watching from storefronts saw something they had not expected. They did not see dirt. They did not see shame. They saw strength. The girl stood up slowly and turned. Across the street, the cowboy leaned against a hitching post, watching quietly. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Gratitude passed between them easily. Because both of them understood something the rest of the town was only beginning to learn. The miracle had never been the washing of dirt. It had never been the brushing of tangled hair. The real miracle was something much simpler. One stubborn man had refused to let a human soul believe it was worthless. And because of that refusal, the girl who once hid behind us in shame now stood in the open sunlight. Not as a stray, not as something broken, but as herself. And long after the Texas wind swept fresh dust across the streets of Red Willow, the story remained. Not about a filthy girl who became beautiful, but about a brave heart that someone finally allowed to shine.